So you've thought about going drifting and everything points you to buying like a Nissan 240SX or some sort of drift build 350Z or spending $20,000 on a car. By jumping into a sport you may not even know if you're actually going to enjoy. Drifting is the most expensive motorsport, I think, in terms of like just jumping into it as an everyday guy or gal. Sure, drag racing's super expensive if you've got a team and you're trying to make world records. If you're just trying to drift on like a side weekend every once in a while, it is an insanely expensive sport, especially when you go into modifying your car. So does that mean it always has to be expensive? I'm not really sure, which by the way, I'm Alex.Martin with 2 underscores over here on Torque Motorsport, and we're gonna talk about some of the best drift mods you can do that aren't super expensive, but are actually really cheap. Which by the way, if you're kind of like a part snob or anything like that, you're not gonna wanna watch this video because it's not gonna feature the expensive name brand parts. It's gonna feature the exact opposite, because let's be honest, bragging about just a part but not actually using it means nothing. You wanna get out there, you wanna drive your car, and you wanna drift it. Here's some really easy, cheap ways to get into drifting. And we're gonna make an assumption here. The car that you already have is manual. It's got 3 pedals and a middle bit that allows you to control where the gear thing is, and it also allows you to lock up the rear wheels. Okay, this is important because if you go into trying to drift an automatic car, I don't know how many times I gotta tell you this, is not exactly the easiest thing in the world. We're talking about rear-wheel drive manual cars that you can jump out there and you can drift. Number one, this is something that I think is the most hilarious thing in the world. There's a $35 car part called literally like a drift button, or what you would call like an e-brake lever button. Now, it's just a little thing that you take off on the OEM, and it's that button that you click. When you yank it up, it holds, right? And that's essentially how normal e-brake would work. When you pull the e-brake, you still get the lockup of the rear wheels, but it's not gonna lock the e-brake in place. This allows you to essentially pull up, let go, and the e-brake will come back down, allowing you to initiate a drift. This is like the cheapest way to get your rear tires to break loose, unlike having something like an inline hydro, which is gonna be a few $100s more. That little part, 30 bucks. It's a great thing that you can do to your car. If you have an e-brake right there, then you don't have to worry about actually replacing anything. Sure, it may not look cool as a hydro, but you won't really need it until you're probably into your 4th or 5th drift event. Until you actually know that you want to drift with this car, stay with the cheap stuff. Which by the way, a lot of times people are going to start talking about the differentials. Now you can buy some really nice differentials. I have a Cos 2-way diff in my Nissan Gloria that we got built with Driver Motorsport, and I love it. Some cars like the GR86 that we're drifting for Torque are also have some sort of 1.5-way or 2-way differential in the back from factory, which is also a plus. But some cars have an open differential, and pretty much all that means is that the same axle can rotate the same wheels at different speeds, because, you know, when you're turning, your inside wheel is not gonna turn as much as your outside wheel. So, in simplicity purposes, welding a diff, which is probably the next cheap mod we would 10 out of 10 recommend, enables both wheels to spin at the same time, and when you go into a corner, the inner wheel will lose traction and skip. Give your car a little bit of oversteer and give it a little bit of power, and you can break loose the rear end relatively really easy. Now, when you do go into welding a differential, most of the times it's a very scary process for a first-time person. It was really scary for me just watching somebody do this for the very first time, but it's not that bad, as long as you do it right. A lot of the times you can get a ton of bang for your buck in terms of welding a differential, but it can become a massive pain in the ass if you do it wrong. And let me explain. When you go into breaking your diff open to decide where you're gonna weld it, how you're gonna weld it, all that sort of good stuff, they always recommend that you clean it before you go into welding. Now, you wanna clean up your diff with non-chlorinated brake cleaner, and you're really gonna wanna spend some time cleaning it up, because if you go into weld the diff and you end up having it not actually be clean, the welds will break over time and you become more of a mess. It's more of a pain in the ass than it was the first time. So get it done right, do it once right, and you'll actually have a pretty decent welded diff that will last a very long time. Now, the next thing that you're gonna wanna get are some quality drift tires. Now, hear me out on this, because I spent my first drift day when I had my Nissan Gloria on a set of tires that I think were just all season, no brand name things. And they had a 55 series sidewall, which meant that they were some chunky boys. And when I would go around corners, the sidewalls would flex so much that just getting the car to break loose not only took power, but you also had to break the traction loose, then you had to break the sidewall loose, and it just was really big pain in the ass for me. So going into some like cheap, affordable drift tires that are gonna be skinny, that are gonna be a little bit tighter in terms of the sidewall is gonna be massively beneficial to you. And I would recommend you can pick up a set of cheap drift tires for maybe like $600 to $700. We have the Nexen SU1s on the Toyota GR86, and they're an absolute banger drift tire so much. Gel said it perfectly when he was driving his S chassis with him. He said, the front wheels with the tires, they feel like you have so much authority with where you're pointing the car. And the rear of the tires, which are the same exact tires, can actually burn through really, really well. I burned through mine, I loved them to death. I definitely recommend them. And if you're looking to get up a good set of like quality drift tires that don't break the bank, Nexens are obviously a really good choice. Another cheap drift mod that I would recommend, which isn't about the car, but it's about you, is a helmet. You can buy a good quality helmet for like $60 because rentals suck. A lot of times people stuff all the money into the car, they go to their first drift event, they realize they don't have a helmet, and then they rent one, and it's like flopping around and it's hitting you in the face as you're driving around town. You don't wanna do that, okay? Floppy helmets are a pain. You need a helmet to drift anywhere on any track, and if you plan on using your car for pretty much anything outside of just driving on the street, you're gonna need a helmet. The final thing that I would say, and as much as I hate to say it, is probably the most expensive part of the cheap list, are going to be coilovers. Now, you can get a pretty decent coilover setup for about $1,000 on any sort of track rat drift setup. And coilovers are gonna be great because when you start to lower the car and you start to tighten up the suspension, you don't get as much unnecessary weight transfer in the places that you don't want to. You're not gonna see a whole lot of body roll. You're gonna see a lot more connectivity to the drive as you're going through the corners, and coilovers are a must-have if you plan on drifting your car. You don't need to start, but it's definitely a great way to really start to feel the car way more, because when it comes to drifting, it is a little bit like dancing. You gotta feel it out as you're in the car. It's not something that you can really prepare for, especially if it's your first couple times going out there. You kind of have to go out there, feel it, and then adjust. And the better way you can feel the car, the better you're gonna be able to respond to it. So things like tires, things like coilovers, things like having a good helmet on your face so that you're not blocking your vision, things like having a drift button so you can actually lock up the rear wheels and feel that tire, that rear end kind of come out. These are all things that just help you feel more connected to the car as you're drifting. So those are some of our best cheap drift mods you could probably do to any car, but let me know which one you think is the most valuable and why in the comments section below. And if you're looking for any of this stuff, you can actually go check out our store at shop.torquemotorsport.io, or you can pick up a t-shirt if you want to as well. All of those will be in the links below. It would mean a lot. Thank you so much. I'm Alex, Alex.Martini with 2 underscores on Instagram, and we will see you later. Adios.